And I'll tell people anyway, I'm like, why are you doing this? And for men, a lot of men, it's like, well, I want to pick up chicks. It's like, dude, you're gonna work anyway.
Coach Greg, and I'm here with Dr. Layne Norton, and today's video, it's all about how much fat, what kind of fat, everything to do with fat that you should have in your diet. So welcome.
Thanks for having me, Greg.
Absolutely. So if you haven't heard of Dr. Layne Norton yet, I highly recommend you go to his channel. Very scientific information. He's well-researched doctor. He understands nutrition, and people really don't know enough about fat. They do about proteins. Pretty much everyone knows about protein, but for fat, is there a set amount of fat, like protein, 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight seems to be what people think you should have to build muscle? Is there a minimum amount of fat you need in your diet?
Yeah, it's a great question. And unfortunately, the research on this is super thin. It really is. And a lot of it is percentage based, which I'm not a fan of percentages in terms of diet, because just for example, let's take protein, for instance. I know we're talking about fat, but let's take protein as a percentage. If you diet and you're on, 30% protein diet, well, if you're on 3,000 calories, but you drop to 2,000 calories, that means your protein is going down by, 33%. But protein needs don't go down when you diet. If anything, they go up. So I'm not a big fan of percentages, because it totally depends on the context of the situation. Protein is something that's per lean body mass requiring nutrient. As far as dietary fats go, it probably depends on the type of fat. Obviously we can make saturated fat on our own. Like, we don't need really outside help. And even if we had zero fat intake, you can make saturated fat from carbohydrate via de novo lipogenesis. So saturated fat doesn't really have like a minimum requirement. But if you go to things like some of the polyunsaturated fats and some of the monounsaturated fats, those do have a requirement. But if you look at the literature, and the other thing that's difficult is depends on what you mean by need, right? That's a lot of people don't think about that, but that is a really nuanced question. Talk about what you need to survive. It's probably very minimal. I mean, you're probably talking about, grams per day. If you're talking about needing to prevent a hormone deficiency in terms of the sex hormones, if we look at the research studies, it says, if you drop from 30% fat diet to 10 or 15%, there is a decline in testosterone. Now, again, percentages matter. If you were on 2,000 calories and dropped to 10% fat, it might be a problem. If you're on 4,000 calories and drop to 10% fat, I kind of don't think it's going to be a problem, right? And there's a couple reasons for that. One, energy is fat sparing. So if you're eating a lot of carbohydrate and you're eating, like, let's say you're eating a lot of carbohydrate to make up those 4,000 calories and not a ton of fat, but you're getting like 40, 50 grams a day. Well, even though your fat's low, carbohydrate spares fat from oxidation. So that carbohydrate that you're eating is actually being used for fuel and oxidized for energy, while that fat can be spared for other processes that it's needed for. So again, if we're talking about like a maintenance or deficit amount of calories, it might be something where, we're talking about, you don't want to go below, 20%. But again, like, as you're getting lower and lower in calories, and Greg, you and I have both been, contest lean, that number is probably higher as a percentage of calories, right? But if you're at 1,800 calories eating 30 grams of fat, it's a greater percentage than if you're at, 2,500 calories eating 30 grams of fat. So it's a really difficult discussion.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I'm not into this whole percent thing. Like, most people, dietitians, are going to say 15% is the absolute minimum, but they're going to recommend more like 25 to 30%. I'm thinking, well, I eat 3,500 calories a day. I might only get 10% on some days, but that 10% for me is higher grammage than somebody else eating 25% who's on a diet. I often tell people, women never eat below about 1,200 calories, men 1,800, because you're not very likely to get enough of your macro and micronutrients. Now, do you think that people should actually eat a certain amount of grams? Because I get all the time, how many grams should I eat in a day? People want to know the I often will say macros don't matter that much because you're going to get calories in, calories out to lose weight. But is there a grams, like a female shouldn't go below 30 grams and a man shouldn't go below 40? Is there anything you can give us? And if so, does it also depend on the type? Like, we don't need saturated fat at all. Trans fatty acids, I'm sure people know they don't need. Poly, omega-3 versus omega-6. Like, can you speak more to that?
Yeah, and again, great questions, and we just don't have very much evidence on it. I'll give you my personal opinion. It depends on the context, right? Like, because a lot of your audience and my audience are people who are interested in bodybuilding and getting to really low levels of body fat. Something you have to understand for those of you who want to compete or have the desire to get really lean is at that point you are triaging. Like, something is going to go and you just got to pick what's going to go. And so fats are very energy dense. And so it is very hard to get lean, like really lean on a high fat diet. It is very, very difficult, even if your carbs are extremely low, because fat is so energy dense. So at a certain point, your fat is probably going to have to be low. Now, you can drop your carbohydrates pretty low, but we also know that carbohydrates are very protein sparing, very muscle sparing in terms of they inhibit protein oxidation and they inhibit protein breakdown through their effects on insulin. So it's like, what do you want to trade out? Okay, you're worried about testosterone, but then like, well, how does that balance up versus like inhibiting protein degradation? And I will tell you, based on the research literature, I think that inhibiting protein degradation during a calorie deficit is probably more important than trying to maintain your testosterone 10, 15% higher. Small, and when I say small, I mean like less than 30%, small changes in testosterone in the physiological range don't really seem to make a big impact in terms of muscle mass. Now, people will hear that and they'll say, Lane's saying testosterone doesn't build muscle. No. If you inject testosterone and you take a shitload of it, yes, it will build more muscle. Absolutely. But what I'm saying is that small differences in the physiological range don't appear to make a huge difference in terms of muscle mass. Probably makes a bigger impact on how you feel in your sex drive. But you're right, Greg, in terms of the actual types of fats, if you're somebody, again, first off, we're not having this conversation with people who are eating 4,000 calories a day or 3,000 calories a day who are eating a decent amount of fat. Like if you're eating over 50 grams of fat per day as a male and they're decent fats, I'd say you're probably, for most people, you're probably fine. If you're a female, over 25, 30 grams a day, as long as your calories aren't incredibly low, you'll be fine because there's going to be carbohydrate there to spare those fats from oxidation. Now, that being said, again, if you are somebody who's on low calories, what do you prioritize? Like you can say, well, I want to prioritize fats. Well, now you're neglecting carbohydrate and your training may suffer. You may have higher rates of protein degradation. Like when you're trying to get that lean, you're trying to stop, you're circling, Eric Helms says, you're circling a drain and you're trying to stop from going down the drain, but eventually you're going to go down the drain no matter what you do. So at that point, it's just personal preference. What do you prefer? What shit would you rather eat, right? So when it comes to omega-3s specifically, I think that those can be a really handy supplement for somebody who's very low calorie, because you could get in just a 2-gram fat capsule way over what you require from omega-3s per day. So I think that's actually one of the best bets in terms of a supplement for bodybuilders and for the average person too, because the research studies pretty much show that omega-3s probably have benefits for blood lipids and heart disease. There are some that show no benefits, but nothing really shows a negative. And there's actually some evidence that they may enhance protein synthesis as well. So I think, having 2 grams of a very high quality EPA, DHA, like really trying to get something that has over a gram of EPA and over half a gram of DHA per day is a pretty good idea.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. Omega-3 fatty acids, I substitute them into my diet, whether or not I'm eating fatty fish. I just have it every day. It's just something I do every day. And as far as dieting, for me, I'm such a proponent of doing cardio because it allows you to eat more food. You're burning off more calories. And as you eat more food, you're taking in more nutrients, macronutrients, micronutrients. So if you're dieting without doing cardio, you're going to have to eat fewer calories, which then makes it harder to get the protein you need, the fats you need, and so on. And you also mentioned that you're going to have lower testosterone levels if you really cut your fat too low. But that if you don't cut your fat too low, maybe you're cutting out on your carbs, you don't have energy to train, you're not eating enough protein. So which do you want to suffer on? Do you want to have not enough fat? Do you want to have not enough protein? Calories? It's going to make a huge difference. So what do you want to do? If I personally, I got girls getting going all over me. So what do you want to do? Do you want to suffer? Because I keep telling people when I eat a lot of fat, I find it harder to diet. So I suggest to eat less fat. I don't say to eat no fat, but when you eat less fat, you might not have the hormone production that you need if you cut it too low. So rather than cutting it too low, eat a little bit of fat, but do a little bit of cardio and realize that if you're in a calorie deficit, struggling to maintain single-digit body fat, you just have this unrealistic view of how you should look, it's not healthy overall. Being overweight, not healthy. Being underweight, not healthy. And people keep trying to be single-digit body fat, thinking that's the be-all, end-all. But I'm here to say probably smarter to be halfway to your dream physique. Maybe 15% fat for men or 25% for women, and having realistic goals. Because if you try to diet too hard, something's going to suffer. Low testosterone, low sex drive, low energy, something is going to suffer.
Yeah, it's funny because I tell people all the time who are trying to get that like stage look all, year round. There is a small percentage of the population who can be very lean, and they tend to be people who just are very spontaneously active, who fidget a ton, who move a ton, and they have active jobs. But for the most part, that's not a sustainable physique for most people. And I'll tell people anyway, I'm like, why are you doing this? And for men, a lot of men, it's like, well, I want to pick up chicks. It's like, dude, your dick ain't gonna work anyway. Like, it's not gonna work. Especially, if you're natty, it's not gonna work because your test is gonna be too low. And from what I understand on steroids, it may not work anyway because of that. So, like, what do you want? And like girls, I mean, yeah, they like a nice physique, but a lot of them don't really care about that much if that's all you got to offer. So, yeah, it's why are you doing it? And I think getting back to the fat, Greg, I thought of something as you were talking. And I think it's important to understand that sometimes people conflate how they feel on a low fat diet with the fact that low fat diets are just low calorie diets, right? So I might say something, well, I tried a low fat diet and I felt terrible. Well, yeah, you were on a low calorie diet. Like, of course you felt bad, And the other thing I'll say is, when we give recommendations about calories and fats, I mean, I've had females that are under 1,200 calories. I've had males under 1,700 calories. But these were people trying to push to the extreme of low body fat levels. And these were targeted sprints, right? People get too dogmatic about this kind of stuff. So it's like if I have two different scenarios. If I have a female who's 3 weeks out from a show, and I know she's within striking distance. She just needs to lose like another kilo or two. And so we're going to sprint to the finish. And I'll explain to her, this is going to be really hard. You're going to feel terrible. And you need to be ready for the repercussions afterwards, because there's probably going to be some pretty quick weight gain, as well as just really bad hyperphagia. Versus if I have a female who's down to 1,200 calories, who's got 30 pounds to go on her goal, and feels like she's just slogging her way through a diet, that's a different conversation altogether. That's okay. Maybe we need to stop focusing on dieting for a little while, focus on, building strength, building lean body mass, eating some more food, fueling the machine, get you to a better place overall, and then take another stab at this, So I think people need to just be acutely aware of the nuances and the conversations that happen, because I just see so much black and white thinking on the internet.
And I think it's ridiculous that most people would think they can follow something that a competitor does. So like when I'm a week out from a pro bodybuilding show and I'm hardly eating any fat and I'm doing, say, it's 2 hours cardio a day, that's not something that I would recommend any normal person does. 99% of people watching our videos, they're not competing at 5% body fat. So it doesn't really apply to them. So this information for me is for that average person that just wants to be healthy. Now, I get it all the time. Followed your diet, your cookbook, and they specifically don't eat the foods that have any fat. They won't have the salmons and so on. And they'll be like, it didn't work. I got down to 7% body fat. I was hungry all the time, even though my stomach was full. It's because I didn't eat enough fat. You were dieting in 1,000 calorie deficit for 3 months. You went from 20% to 7 and you're trying to maintain 7 and you didn't have energy, you didn't have a sex drive, and it's because you didn't have enough fats. And then they'll say, oh, I added in fats and now I feel healthy, but now they're at 15%.
Yeah.
I mean, that's exactly what the kind of thing you were suggesting. And I was like, as you were saying, I was like, that's 100% what I hear. These people that are trying to have unrealistically low body fat percentages. And it's not the low fat in the diet, it's the low calories. It's what it is.
Yeah. And I mean, even like, for example, Greg, a lot of it just boils down to like low body fat just sucks in general. Even if you're somebody who has high energy expenditure. I had a client who he was only about 170 pounds, maybe a little bit less than that actually, stage lean. And he was able to get there eating like 2,600 calories a day. Like that's pretty high calorie amount for somebody his body weight. I got news for you guys. He still felt like garbage, had no libido, had no energy, because even though his energy expenditure is higher, as you mentioned, Greg, I think one of our last videos, 1,000 calorie energy deficit, still 1,000 calorie energy deficit, right? And it doesn't, there is some evidence that move more, eat more may be a little bit better than, move less, eat less. But again, it's still, you're circling the drain and eventually you're going to go down the drain. So, the one benefit to moving more and being able to eat more is just you have more flexibility in your food choices. That's the biggest benefit, but the hunger is still going to be there. The energy deficit side effects are still going to be there. And so you really got to ask yourself, like, on your way down to your dream physique, have check-ins with yourself and say, okay, what I'm doing right now, does this feel sustainable? Could I sustain this? Like how I feel? And then, okay, we get to the next one. Oh, is this sustainable? Could I take how I feel? And remember that, like, even if you go past that, because I'm sure you've had this experience, Greg, and I'm interested in your thoughts. My wife and I have both had this experience where on the way down, as we're hitting a certain check mark, we go, you know what, I'd be happy with this physique. I feel good. I have plenty of energy, this and that. And then you get to stage lean. And as you come back up through that same physique, you're very unhappy with it. It's so, I don't know if that's been your experience.
I literally speak of this all the time. You're 200 pounds and you lose weight. You're now 175 and you feel freaking fantastic. You get down to 150 with the Pro-Tan dehydrated, you win your show and you're like, wow. Then you go back to 175, of which you were amazed because you just lost 25 and you feel fat. And you now think you have to be 150. And that's where those disordered eating patterns and improper body image can result. You don't like the reflection in the mirror. And it's why I tell people not to gain weight so quickly after a show, because I can't say the word, acclimatized or whatever. You're getting used to what you see, and what you see is shredded. And on the way back, if you go from being shredded to normal in a day or two, it's horrible. And I can say, when I've approached, for example, 4% body fat, I feel like shit. I don't care how many PDs, steroids, testosterone levels, no matter how high it is, I still feel like garbage. And after the show is over, I still feel like garbage because my body fat is not high enough. I'm in a surplus. I'm eating 4,000 or 5,000 calories a day after show. And I'm gaining weight. I'm in a surplus. I still have no energy. I feel like shit. But when I'm 9% like now, I always feel good. And if I said, oh, I feel great right now, I want to get leaner. When I get to about 8%, the nightmare begins. And every percent lower, way worse. It's way freaking worse, which is why I keep telling people, you can't just look at your dream body, your Gymshark athlete and say, I want to have that six pack. Yeah, everyone can get a six pack. If you diet hard enough, you're going to get shredded. You'll eventually starve to death and die. Everyone can get lean, but it's not up in the cards for everyone. Not everyone can function at 6, 7, 8% body fat. And in fact, most need somewhere in that 10 to 20% range to feel good. The elite level athletes, the ones with the best genetics, they can handle those lean levels. Like I was talking to Ian Valère. He's at 5% body fat, training like an animal, drop set, super. He can do it. He has energy. Not everyone has that genetic ability to train at that lean of a level.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is really astute observations on your part. And again, just having people set reasonable goals for themselves and not, I don't think you or I are saying that, hey, you should never do bodybuilding. You should never get shredded. I think what we're saying is, hey, there are some trade-offs here, and you need to be really honest with yourself about how bad you really want this, because it is very, very hard, and it's very hard getting off stage. And like what tends to happen, and I've seen this so much, is because you get so lean, you're getting all the compliments. You look so good. You're so shredded. Those sorts of things. You get your identity wrapped up in being that lean. And then when it's over, if you don't have something else to focus on, I mean, I've seen it many, many times where people just start chasing the rabbit and they're dieting for fall shows. And then the holidays come afterwards and they balloon up, and then they're going to diet for spring shows to get themselves back in shape. And then they balloon up during the barbecue months of the summer, and then they're going to diet again for fall shows. And it is a really bad thing to get into if that's going to be your mentality. But if your mentality is, I'm doing this because I want to push myself, I want to see what I'm capable of, I understand that it is not sustainable long term, and I'm going to be able to let go, that is the proper mentality to have.